Hi, I'm Dave Hilowitz. So if you've watched any of my videos in the past 6 months, you've probably noticed this thing in the background. A lot of people have reached out and asked me what it is, so I figured I would make a video. So first off, what is it? Basically, it's exactly what it looks like. I took a bunch of music gear that you'd normally see on a studio shelf or on the floor or something, and I put it on the wall. We'll get into how I did that in a second, but first, let's talk about why I did it. Well, about 8 months ago, I was cleaning my studio and I realized that I own a ton of music gear that I just never ever use. Drum machines, synths, that Moog synthesizer, I'm ashamed to say I basically never use it. And the reason I wasn't using it is because it was tucked in the background, in a closet or on a shelf or something like that. And if I don't see something, it doesn't occur to me to use it in a track. So this was my solution to that problem. The idea being that if it's in my line of sight, I'm much more likely to make use of it. So how did I put it together? Putting this together was super simple. IKEA sells these pegboards called SYNTHS. The board itself is screwed into the wall with very, very deep screws. That being said, I'm sure it's going to crash to the ground at some point while I'm in the middle of making a video. Once you've got the pegboard attached to the wall, you can use any number of different adapters that IKEA sells. The most useful ones are definitely these rubber band thingies. Pretty much all the synths are anchored to the pegboard using those. Okay, so let's talk about the gear. I didn't choose the gear for this project, I already owned it, but it does seem to all work really well together. Let's start with the rhythm section, the Korg Electribe ER1. This is the only real groove box that I own. It's an analog style drum machine, which means that most of the sound that it generates comes from oscillators instead of samples. It's really good at making kick drums. But it sucks at snare drums, so much so that I basically don't use snare drums at all when I'm using this rig. It's pretty good at bleeps and bloops though. Moving on. This thing is a Launchpad Pro Mark I. The original Mark I version of the Launchpad didn't have a sequencer in it, but this wonderful guy named Quentin Laméron made his own custom firmware for it that turns it into a sequencer. I use this sequencer for two things. Most importantly, it generates the master clock signal that gets sent to the other two boxes. When I press play here, the other two boxes come to life. I also use this sequencer to make patterns for the Moog that sits right below the pegboard. The sequencer is pretty powerful, but the interface is a little out there. Thankfully, Quentin made a video on how to use it, otherwise I'd be totally out to sea. In the top left, we've got a Volca keys. It's sort of a modern classic at this point, a tiny analog synthesizer with 3-voice polyphony. Sometimes I use the built-in sequencer, and sometimes I use the Launchpad to control it. Finally, in the top right, I've got this tiny mixer. Not much to say about it except that, yeah, it does mix signals. It was very cheap and doesn't introduce too much noise. You may notice that there are actually 4 things plugged in here, but I've only shown you 3. Which brings me to another cool thing about this setup. The Volca keys outputs a sync blip, which allows me to sync my pocket operator, a PO33 knockout. So now if we want, we could actually add a snare drum. Let's add some hats as well. I guess I'll add some vocals. So that's pretty much it. I have to say, I've really been enjoying this DAW-less setup. I do most of my composing with samples in Ableton or Logic or Reaper, and yeah, that's a great experience. The workflow has become basically second nature at this point. I can get just about any sound that I want with almost no obstacles at all. In fact, it's so easy that I become spoiled. I almost always choose to work within the box. And when I'm met with any resistance at all, even something as basic as just the need to plug in an instrument, it's enough to stop me from using a piece of equipment. Having this thing up on the wall has been a great way of making sure that I actually use those pieces of gear that were like previously just gathering dust. If you enjoyed this video, it would be great if you could give me a thumbs up. And if you've not subscribed already, now would be a great time. It's free and you'll be notified whenever I make a new video. See you next time.